The real self in the egoless state is none other than the reality called Sat, or that which is. This Sat, or reality existence, is also Chit, or consciousness. For nothing is real that does not exist in its own right. Whatever has no consciousness can exist only by consciousness. That is why the sages say that the world is mental. The self, we have seen, is the one indubitable reality. And when the sheaths fall away, the self remains as pure consciousness, beyond the three states. We shall now see why the self is said to be consciousness, instead of saying that the self, or Atman, is conscious. The explanation is very simple, though of very great importance. The mind is conscious, but poorly and fitfully so. The mind's consciousness fails utterly in sleep. There must be some source wherefrom the mind receives consciousness, as was pointed out previously. This source is therefore the original consciousness, which shines constantly, unlike the mind. Because its consciousness never fails, therefore consciousness is its very nature. And this meaning is expressed by saying that the self, Atman, the source here meant, is consciousness. We find the teaching in the ancient lore also. The real self is described in one of the Upanishads as endless consciousness. The purpose of this description is, says the sage Shankara, to differentiate it from the fitful awareness of objects that goes by the name of knowledge among men. Consciousness, therefore, is not to be understood as a mere attribute of the real self, but as its very essence. This consciousness is manifest as the I am, the common factor of all thoughts and of all perceptions. This truth is clearly expressed in one of the Upanishads, where the self is called prajanam, which means consciousness. In its purity, uncontaminated by mixing up with the unreal sheaths or with their changing states, this is the real self. The common notion that knowledge or awareness is an attribute or quality is just the reverse of the above teaching. Consciousness is not a quality. Consciousness is the very substance of reality. And reality is real solely because consciousness is consciousness. Consciousness alone exists. There is nothing else. It is often styled the supreme consciousness, to differentiate it from the mind and intellect. This supreme consciousness, says the Upanishads, existed alone in the beginning, when all this universe did not exist. It created out of itself the bodies of creatures, and itself entered into them as soul. This becoming or creation is not to be taken as an event that happened actually. We shall see that presently this will be disclosed. The purpose of these stories of creation in the ancient lore is to convey in a graphic manner the teaching that the self, Atman, in us is just reality, that there is no individual soul, no individual ego. If creation actually took place, it would follow that the reality was broken into parts. That is absurd, as we have seen before. This is what the sage tells us. The reality is neither broken into parts, nor does it suffer limitation. Reality only seems to be so. The mind it is that causes the appearance of parts by falsely identifying itself with bodies of sheaths and thus limiting it. The mind imagines reality as finite, thinking itself to be finite. These limitations and divisions are in the mind alone. But the mind has no existence apart from the self. A jewel made of gold is not quite the same as gold, because it is gold with a name and a form superadded. But it is not other than gold. Mind is just a mysterious power of the self, by which the one self appears as many. Only when the mind rises do the three, God, soul, and world, appear. In sleep, the three are not seen nor thought of. This is just what is known in Advaitic metaphysics as the truth of non-becoming, ajati siddhanta, which is found definitely and categorically stated by Gaudapada, the author of the Madhukya Karikas, on which the sage Shankara has written a lucid commentary. Shankara's own writings are in perfect agreement with it, and the sage of our Arunachala has made it his own. It is said of him by a disciple, though the Holy One has given out truths, modified according to the bias of questioners, yet he teaches the truth of non-becoming, as verified by his own direct experience of the self. Also in the same work, we find the clear enunciation of the truth of non-becoming as follows. There is no creation, nor destruction. There is no one that is bound, nor is there one that strives for liberation, nor anyone that has attained that state. There is no mind, nor body, nor world, nor anyone called the soul. One alone exists, the pure, calm, unchanging reality, which has no second and no becoming. The ego-ridden person sees the variety and is curious to know about how it came. He is told that God made it all, and also that God made it all of himself. By thinking on this, he comes to see that all this multiplicity is a unity in something which is called God. He next wants to know about God. He is persuaded that God must be a person like himself, though different in size, power, and qualities. In the beginning, therefore, he has to be allowed to go his own way. But there comes a time when he can bear to be told that God is not a person at all. Then the sage tells him that God is egoless. The meaning is that God is the one reality, which is the self in all.